Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Let me just echo the thanks and the gratitude that has been bestowed earlier by so many folks for this wonderful, for Brianna and Raquel and Rachel and everyone who had anything to do with this tremendous meeting. The sharing and the insights are something that are extremely rich and valuable, and I think will be something that will be beneficial for us for years to come. As Don mentioned, I'm the director of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, and over the years we have a history of doing things, working with immigrants, working with workers, working with low-income communities that encourage and insist on their involvement, insist on leadership development, that their voices might be heard on every level. As Bishop DiMarzio was talking this morning, I couldn't help but think of my own childhood and growing up in Texas, where we were ministered to by teachers from Ireland who came to Ireland. It had such a profound impact on myself and all of the kids who were there in the schools. I was the only kid in my neighborhood with an Irish brogue. And I could sing all of the verses to "Oh Danny Boy." But I think if you would ask myself and any of us, that all of them prepared us to assume leadership roles and not just in our community, but in the church. Leadership roles that we had no idea what they were training and preparing us for. So the Catholic Campaign for Human Development actually lives there, trying to develop folks in leadership roles, and particularly asking ourselves right now, the very hard question is, how can we help prepare immigrants who face all of the obstacles that we heard earlier, for leadership roles in the church and in the broader society. We heard several times about the integration of immigrants and how their voices might be the voices that might help be self-determining of their futures. We heard about leadership parity, leadership development, representing both the church and the society on the whole, and moving beyond that hospitality to homecoming and helping to create homes for themselves. And I think as we do this, and we're going to hear from some tremendous folks here in just a few minutes, that as we do this, that it's important that it's a true hospitality, homecoming, and inclusion. An inclusion in the decisions that are helping them make the decisions for themselves and their families and for the future. And in doing that, that is true and there's not an illusion of inclusion. That it just seems like it's inclusion. It has to be very, very true. And we're going to hear from some folks who have made that kind of their life's work, if you will. Great panel of folks who are here with us this afternoon. First is Joe Fleming, who's the Executive Director of PICO, New Jersey, that's People Improving Communities Through Organizing. Alexia Kelley, who's the CEO of Foundations and Donors Interested in Catholic Activities, or FADCA. She was also formerly a White House Faith-Based Office Director. Annette Parsons, she's the Chief Education Administrator and Director of Segura Initiative, Diocese of Richmond. And finally, last but not least, Father Thomas Greene, who's the Secretary of Social and International Ministries for the Jesuit Conference of the United States. Please give them all a round of applause, and we'll welcome first will be Joe.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. I thought I would go multimedia after lunch. I hope you can handle that. So I want to thank Don Kerwin as well for the invitation to be with you all here today and to share a little bit of an experience of faith-based community organizing that I think can inform the discussion a little bit about immigrant leadership development. I want to thank Brianna and Rachel too for their help logistically in putting this together. I am a third-generation Irish-American Catholic, grew up outside of Philadelphia, and I had the good experience of being educated by Jesuits in Philadelphia and at Georgetown University, where I had the good fortune to be Don Kerwin's classmate and to join or to share an experience with Don of doing volunteer work in Peru for a couple of years. I hope you don't mind me publicly acknowledging that relationship, Don. That experience really brought me into faith-based community organizing. So for the last about 27 years, I have been working in the state of New Jersey with faith communities, with a large A number of those congregations being Catholic parishes that are involved in the social justice work of the church. PICO is 60 federations across the U.S., working in 17 states. And it is a multi-faith network of congregations. About 1 in 3 of the 1,200 congregations that participate with PICO in faith-based organizing are Catholic. And it's a vehicle for congregations to do the, social justice work. I just want to acknowledge that the USCCB and the Catholic Campaign for Human Development have really been critical partners for us in the work of faith-based community organizing. And I want to publicly thank them for their support. Okay. So there are 3 pillars of our organizing model which really shape our work with immigrant and non-immigrant clergy and lay leadership. The first is power, or the capacity to make things happen, get things done, is a product of relationship. So we spend a lot of time on intentionally building relationship. Second is leadership development. We believe that leadership development needs to be at the heart of the work so that people can develop their gifts and their experiences and come into a sense of their own personal agency. And lastly, the faith values of a congregation really need to be the source of their action and reflection. And I just want to say, in light of the conversation today, that I think particularly for immigrant communities, this faith dimension is really critical to the sense of feeling powerful, I think is the way that Bishop DiMarzio talked about it earlier, that people have to feel powerful before they can assimilate. So I think faith really is an important piece of this, that folks feel their own sense of dignity in very trying circumstances, and that gives them the courage to step forward. So it's not just a thin veneer of faith language on top of a more secular kind of organizing model, but it's really part and parcel of how we think about organizing. So I'm going to come in the side door a little bit on this conversation. I want to tell a quick story, an organizing story, that along the way I will draw out certain points about leadership development among immigrant communities. About a year ago, PICO launched what we call the Campaign for Citizenship, and it was a response both to the urgent need that we've been talking about among undocumented immigrants in our congregations and communities to fix the broken immigration system, and the perceived political opening to push comprehensive immigration reform through Congress after the 2012 election cycle. So PICO partnered with the USCCB's Justice for Immigrants program, and Kevin Appleby has been a really tremendous partner through our work over the last year. And together we developed a plan to support JFI's advocacy work in 15 dioceses across the country, particularly in New Jersey and New Mexico, Indianapolis and Florida, but in a number of other places as well. And we received a national CCHD grant, both PICO and JFI, to implement that project. And our goal was to build parish-level organizing teams made up of immigrant and non-immigrant members to support the push for CIR. And an important piece of that was to educate immigrants on their rights and to support implementation of DACA at the local level. I just want to make a point that immigrants are not going to be able to achieve their liberation on their own, nor can non-immigrant communities achieve it for them. It really does have to be an enterprise that brings together both immigrant and non-immigrant communities. And that's the work that we've been trying to do both in New Jersey and across the country. So as we were gearing up back in April, and the Gang of Eight was negotiating on the Senate version of CIR, Archbishop Gomez delivered a strong and very timely statement reiterating the conference's support of a path to citizenship and maintaining the bishop's consistent teaching on the need to fix the immigration system that's been held for many years. I just want to say that it was heartening to hear Archbishop Gomez's statement at the end of the week on the need for a moratorium on deportations. That was published on Friday, I believe, and so I think Elena was bringing that up earlier. I think it's a really important signal coming from Archbishop Gomez on this issue. So one of our organizing principles is that structures channel power. And it was our analysis that if we can work with JFI to help diocesan and parish leaders channel the full power and energy and moral authority of the Catholic Church on this issue, then we might be able to win comprehensive immigration reform that is worthy of our immigrant communities and really worthy of all of us. So the question then was, how do we help to disseminate and amplify the Church's teaching on the need for immigration reform throughout the entire structure, and from there into the broader community, so that all levels of the institution are aligned and communicating their support for reform to both federal and state officials. So we thought of it as closing the loop. We had some great statements from the national conference. Occasionally, we've had some really strong statements as well from state Catholic conferences, and we just saw the need to connect all of the dots and to make sure that Catholic voters in the pews really understood the Church's teaching on the issue. Because there's a lot of miseducation that was going on as we experienced it. So we wanted, and just a lot of unawareness as well. So we wanted to really make sure that we were engaging the full Catholic community in this conversation about the need for reform. And in New Jersey, 1 in 4 voters is Catholic. So from a political vantage point, it was a key piece of a strategy. So we held a statewide training last March with about 80 faith leaders from across the state of New Jersey. I'm going to tell a local story and try to make a larger point. I recognize that what we did in New Jersey is just part of what was happening all across the country. But I think I find it helpful just to talk about one particular situation and then build out from there. So our goal was to equip clergy, women religious, diocesan staff, immigrant and non-immigrant parishioners with the tools to educate, organize, and mobilize their faith communities to speak out for reform. And so in the 2 days that we did this training, we did teach about know your rights. We taught about how to tell your personal story, how to build organizing teams back in your parishes, how to hold educational forums on CIR in your parishes, how to do political analysis, how to hold a meeting with a member of Congress, and we also discussed state policy opportunities. So this is one of the teams from St. Joseph's in Summers Point. Bishop DiMarzio, Bishop was bishop in Camden when I began organizing, and so some of these parishes, although perhaps some have been reconfigured, will be familiar to him. So folks who went through the training went back to their parishes and built 12 organizing teams across South Jersey. Here's another from Ocean City. This is the team from Camden, with Camden Churches Organized for People. And they built their teams, and then they went and met with Bishop Dennis Sullivan, who was newly arrived to Camden last spring. And they went to Bishop and they asked him, would you be willing to hold a Mass for immigrant families in the diocese? And just prior to that, there had been a national Mass on the Mall that Justice for Immigrants was centrally involved in organizing. So we saw it as an echo of that event. And Bishop Sullivan agreed to hold the Mass. And leaders in the room who had met with him pledged that they would mobilize 1,000 parishioners to attend the Mass. So the Mass was held on May 2nd in Vineland, which is in Congressman Frank Lobiando's district. So folks, they did not turn out 1,000 people, but they did turn out 1,200 people for the Mass. And local media took notice, and Bishop Sullivan really delivered a very strong message that there is a moral urgency for reform. We've got to take action. So over the course of the summer, 40 vigils were held outside of Congressman Lobiando's office. This altar was set up outside of his office, and lay leaders and women religious led the charge, really engaging both the larger community around his office as well as his staff over the course of the summer. And each day, undocumented immigrants would go into the office and meet with his staff and share their stories of living in the shadows. And for them, it was a very powerful experience of being able for the first time to give voice to what they were experiencing and the way in which they felt marginalized and isolated and powerless. So I think this is, for me, this is one of the most powerful parts of the experience over the last year, is to hear undocumented immigrant leaders talk about finding their voice for the first time and to speak with their congressman, which I thought was remarkable. So over the course of 10 weeks, 40 vigils outside of his office. So that continuous presence led to 3 face-to-face meetings with Congressman Lobiondo, whose brother is a Jesuit priest, actually, who we know through Georgetown. And faith leaders urged Congressman Lobiondo to publicly come out in support of a path to citizenship. Unfortunately, he has yet to do that, although he has privately expressed some inclination that maybe when we get there, you're the group that I'm going to want to kind of make my public statement with, but it has not yet happened. Okay. Speaking of deportation work, the organizing in the Diocese of Camden was soon replicated in other dioceses throughout the state, with Trenton, Metuchen, and Newark, JFI teams working with their bishops and with the New Jersey Catholic Conference staff to educate, organize, and mobilize. So in a similar way, there were masses for immigrant families, there were vigils in particular places, and lots of work to gather the JFI postcards and to deliver them to their members of Congress. I meant to add a moment ago, forgive me, in Camden, that same weekend we had the Mass with 1,200 parishioners. That was the weekend that Bishop Sullivan designated as Justice for Immigrants Sunday throughout the Diocese of Camden. And he instructed the pastors and clergy in the 70 parishes of the diocese to preach and teach on the church's teaching on immigration reform that weekend. And so that took place in the spring. And about 11,000 JFI postcards were gathered up that weekend and then delivered to members of Congress. So this example, this case of Eugenio, he was detained and separated from his family for 9 months when we learned of this. He was a parishioner, is a parishioner. His family are members of St. Mark's in Segura, New Jersey. And so when we learned of the case, we decided that it would be critical to lift this up, both to deal with the immediate case of Eugenio and his separation from his family, but also to illustrate, to dramatize the inhumanity of our immigration system. So lots of work was generated, and after about, I'm sorry, I'm on to the next slide. So part of what the work that followed was to visit Congressman Chris Smith's office to ask him to get involved. And at the end of the day, after about 10 weeks of work, Eugenio was released and is back with his family. So the work in New Jersey really was just a reflection of work that was happening all across the country. Work happening in the Diocese of Brooklyn as well, and really through JFI, all in communities across the nation. And what began to happen in the late summer was kind of a growing awareness among the media that something is different. It seems like the Catholic Church is really coming at this in a very powerful kind of a way. And in early September, around Labor Day, when there was a national Justice for Immigrants Sunday called by the bishops across the country, both the New York Times and Univision ran stories focusing on the deep engagement of Catholic communities in the fight for immigration reform. And pictured here are Father Rene Canales from South Jersey, from the Diocese of Camden, and Father Scott Santa Rosa from LA. So, as hopes were fading late in the year, in November, a number of organizations across the country, a number of dioceses, planned pilgrimages, kind of a last-ditch effort to lift up the need for action. And our leadership team, diocesan-wide in Camden, came together and with about 2 weeks lead time decided that they were going to organize a 9-day pilgrimage that would go through 4 congressional districts and cover 160 miles. So that is what they did. And along the way, parishes hosted the pilgrims each night, and there were educational forums to help parishioners understand the issue. And they also stopped at the State House to hold a press conference calling for a pending in-state tuition bill to be passed. So these are a few of the pilgrims. And while we did not win, as you all know, CIR in the House by the end of the year, what did happen was that after a 10-year fight, the legislature and the governor of New Jersey enacted an in-state tuition bill that allows undocumented students to pay the same college rates or tuition rates as their peers. I am coming to a close here. So, writ large, this was the sum of work that PICO communities did across the country, identifying 26 congressional districts based on an analysis of which ones were kind of most pivotal in the larger fight. And we had lots of meetings face-to-face with members of Congress, which led some to come out publicly in support of citizenship, led others to vote against the defunding of DACA, and really helped to create a conversation and a momentum across the country on this issue. Still lots of work to be done. On the table there are some copies of a report that captures the work that the PICO National Network did with faith communities, if you're interested in seeing some of the details. But this only represents a portion of the work that took place across the U.S. It does not reflect all of the work carried out by the USCCB and the Justice for Immigrants program. So, a couple of concluding thoughts. This partnership between JFI and PICO has been incredibly exciting for us, very hopeful, and I think has helped to create that kind of full engagement of the institution that I was describing in that graphic at the beginning. I also think that as we move forward, there's a tremendous amount of work to be done. Kevin was holding up some hope. Who felt hopeful hearing Kevin's comments that maybe it's not done, maybe we're not quite done this year? Did anybody feel hopeful? Yeah, I felt hopeful. Yeah, that's okay. We're allowed to feel hopeful, is that right? Okay. And we have a lot of work still to do, that clearly, right? So a lot of work too around deportation, and I think there's a lot of opportunity within state policy. So, a couple of, we're not going to do questions later, are we? Are we going to have time for questions? Okay. So here's my last comment. The power of story. Think about leadership development in immigrant communities. Create an opportunity for undocumented immigrants and others to tell their story and to get out of their private pain and isolation and get connected to others who have the same experience as well as others who have a different experience. And if you want to engage the non-immigrant community in what this issue is all about, have them share stories of their own immigrant experiences with immigrants. And that, we talk about the first revolution is internal. I have seen how that changes people when they hear the stories of one another. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. And I want to also thank Don Kerwin for the invitation and congratulate CMS on this 50th anniversary, right? Is that right? Beginning of your 50th anniversary. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of an overview of FATICA, Foundations and Donors Interested in Catholic Activities. We're a membership network of Catholic foundations and philanthropists. We have about 50 members across the country and some internationally, although our office is based in Washington, D.C. And I want to acknowledge our chair, who's here today and will be speaking with you later, Sister Sally Duffy, who chairs our board, and as the director, the president of SC Ministry Foundation is also a member of our network of FATICA. We were launched in 1976 in the wake and spirit of Vatican II to support lay philanthropic leadership in service to church and society and the common good. And we work to support Catholic Church and Catholic initiatives by networking and resourcing a lay Catholic philanthropic community that's responsive, attuned, and strategic, responding to current challenges facing the church and society and to innovative solutions to those challenges. We do three key things, and two of them start with a C. We are a learning community. We sponsor regular conferences and retreats. Actually, Father Tom Greene just spoke at our annual meeting to our members on Pope Francis and what his vision means for the church today. And through those symposia and retreats, about 3 times a year, members stay abreast of trends and challenges facing the church and Catholic philanthropy. Secondly, we communicate the good news of Catholic initiatives, the work that you're all doing and that needs support in so many different ways. We provide also a collaborative peer network for our members so that they can collaborate together as desired, form partnerships to do better work together where they can. And then we also commission research on issues facing Catholic philanthropy around Catholic stewardship, and we support the spirituality of Catholic giving, of philanthropy, through fellowship and retreats and our prayer programs. It's important to note that we're not a foundation, so we're not a grant-making entity ourselves, but we do produce a resource that many of you may be familiar with, the Catholic Funding Guide, which Vatican's produced almost since its very first years in the 70s. And it's a resource to grant-seeking organizations. It lists about 1,300 foundations and grant-making organizations in the United States and some globally that support Catholic activities. And that you can, if you're not already subscribing to it, I can share more about it, but CatholicFundingGuide.com is where you can order it, and I can tell you a little bit more about it. And we're actually going to launch, it's in its 7th edition in 2012, and we're going to launch an 8th edition online with several hundred new foundations that have come online or are now meeting our criteria for their support for Catholic giving. So that's a little background on who Fatica is. And then I'm going to focus on one example of one of our collaborative initiatives. I mentioned that's one of the things we do is provide a forum for our members to come together, to work together on a joint initiative. And that, the specific example involves supporting leadership in Catholic institutions, immigrant leadership in Catholic institutions specifically. So a number of our members came together just about 2 years ago with Catholic Extension, a member of Fatica also, to support a specific initiative to support and grow Hispanic leadership in the Catholic community, specifically lay ecclesial ministry. And of course, Catholic philanthropy, our members are committed to the flourishing and vitality of the Catholic Church and Catholic organizations, which requires the full inclusion and integration of all members, including immigrant community members. A number of Catholic foundations, both within our membership and beyond, have made Hispanic ministry and leadership development a strong priority. So to explore this and related themes, Fatica and member Catholic Extension sponsored this 2-day conference 2 years ago, A Vibrant Future Developing Hispanic Leadership at the Home Missions. And out of that 2012 symposium, several of our members came together to support a collaborative endeavor, the Hispanic Lay Leadership Initiative, which is coordinated by Catholic Extension, also with the core participation of other partners, including the Mexican American Catholic College. So the initiative is now working to create and help fund 100 lay ecclesial leadership positions in mission dioceses, in particular, for Hispanic Catholics over the next 3 years. And 43 of those new leadership positions have been funded in 31 mission dioceses, so we're still working to fill out that picture for fully supporting the initiative. And those leaders will reach approximately 250,000 Catholics across the country in those positions. And MOC, as I mentioned, is one of the sites supporting the education and training for these lay leaders. I wanted to also mention the work of Dr. Hosman Espino, who's been from BC and is going to speak with us later today as well. He's also been working in this area of emerging Hispanic leadership in ministry, in Hispanic Catholic ministry on many fronts, and working with a number of philanthropic partners as well on those new models and the need for new organizations and leadership. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, in addition to this Hispanic Leadership Initiative, also the central priority of sustaining Catholic schools from primary to high school for many of our Fatica members. our members and many Catholic foundations value and support Catholic schools as a critical pathway in the development of future Catholic leadership and the equipping of young people with the values and skills to succeed both in society and to lead in our church organizations and institutions. So a number of members are working to ensure access in their particular diocese in regional partnerships and initiatives. I know Sister Sally's worked a lot on this in Cincinnati, to ensure access to Catholic schools on the part of all families, regardless of income, language, or any other barriers. I'm going to close now with a mention of our own reflection at Fatica and our focus there on integrating new philanthropic leadership into our work and into our membership. Last summer, there was a great article, Father Joe Corpora at Notre Dame, the ACE program there, forwarded to me in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, and they had an article authored by Maria Perez on immigrant success and philanthropy, focusing in particular on Latinos. The article was called Thinking About the Future of the U.S. Think Latinos, and it was in their regular philanthropy column. And while her article focuses on this U.S. Hispanic community, I think her points are universal for all immigrant communities. She notes that by 2050, Latinos will represent 1/3 of the U.S. population, which is already true for our Catholic community. So we're ahead of the broader society there. And the article calls for a shift to an assets-based perspective in philanthropy and the broader social sector, emphasizing the need to develop, and I love this quote, a new philanthropic narrative that cultivates the range of advantages that Latinos possess. This means a shift from continually addressing them as disadvantaged. The article makes several points, salient points, and I'll extend them here to the broader immigrant community. First, that U.S. grant makers typically view immigrants through a deficit-centered lens. They see them as economically and socially disadvantaged. And while a number of immigrants in the experience do experience socioeconomic hardship, a strength-based approach could alter this view and would dismantle the dominant philanthropic approach which views immigrants as people with disadvantages. And I would say CCHD is probably a counterpoint to that within philanthropy and grant making in particular. She also notes that immigrants express drive, resiliency, perseverance, bilingual and multicultural skills, and these are personal, community, and national assets, and in our case, church assets as well. So she just calls for changing the dominant philanthropic narrative, which can be an effective tool to support socioeconomic advancement, and I would say in our own context, leadership development within Catholic organizations by intentionally tapping into these strengths. So when we turn to the U.S. Catholic philanthropic community, immigrant philanthropic leaders are not often at the center of Catholic philanthropy in the United States. So that means they're not networked with peers or with other philanthropists. They're not working together to identify leadership and church needs and collaborating together for greater impact or making decisions about grant making that is affecting their own communities. So I would argue that the engagement of emerging and immigrant Hispanic Catholic philanthropists in particular is critical to supporting healthy leadership development and inclusion across our Catholic institutions. So Fatica is focused on engaging emerging and long-standing Catholic philanthropists from diverse immigrant Catholic communities and working with a number of partners on programming that in the future with the Mexican American Catholic College, Catholic Extension, and the University of Incarnate Word and others. And I'm open to suggestions on that. We're just starting to look at this area and would welcome your ideas. So I'll close with that because I think I'm over time. I did want to just make one plug though for we have a new philanthropic leadership intern program at Fatica, bringing young people into the work of Catholic philanthropy, exposing them to its practices and also learning from them in terms of new ideas. So if you have a young college or graduate student, we also have a high school program with Krista Ray here. Please let me know. Thanks.
Well, we're going to move from micro to macro, from macro to micro. My name is Annette Parsons, and I oversee Catholic schools and Christian formation for the Diocese of Richmond, which is just down the block. We are a small mission diocese in area, 33,000 square miles, number of Catholics, and it's about 3% of the population are Catholic. I want to really reiterate what I've heard from others, certainly from Bishop. Joe made the point earlier, the importance of telling stories is just so critical. As I look around this room, and many of you who I've met, who have been involved in this movement for many years, you're looking at somebody who's been involved in this movement for 3 years, and I'm involved only because people told me stories. So I'm involved because I'm a third generation Italian, American. Grandparents came and the Scalabrinis took such good care of them. And I'm involved because I heard Father Joe Capora talk so movingly about the plight of recently arrived immigrants. And as a dedicated Anglo, I was completely clueless about that. Having heard some stories, I came back to my own bishop, who has stories of his own, Bishop Di Lorenzo of Richmond, who also was a third generation, descendant of immigrants, who'd heard his family stories, who'd lived them, and knew how powerful Catholic schools could be, and the success of Catholic schools could be if we could get these immigrant children in our schools. So today, it's a dual mission. Some of you have heard me speak in the past, at least I was here last year. I've been asked today to speak about leadership and about the qualities of inviting what we call madrinas or advocates into a program that's working. But as I said to you, this program could never have gotten off the ground were it not for the fact that we had people from the Latino community who schooled me and schooled our team so that as we began to put together a plan, it was a plan that could work and could be replicable. So the mission of Segura is it's a lovely program aimed at taking the poorest of the poor, newly arrived Latino families, and helping them find their way into Catholic schools. I won't even, I think you probably more than I know all of the challenges associated with that. These are families who don't look to Catholic schools as even a possibility. Lots of issues, from transportation to affordability. I could sort of go on and on. So how did we even begin to put together a program that could successfully welcome children into Catholic schools? Well, we reached out to the Latino community. We reached out to those very families and had them tell us what they thought of Catholic schools and if they were interested and what the challenges would be. And then we put together a team of people that included those very people, and we built a program that is really A, beginning to work, and B, is replicable. So let me tell you a little bit about Segura and how it functions. And then I'll tell you a little bit about our latest program and our latest leaders, and those are the women that we call madrinas. We recruit people into our Catholic schools with a very, I think, interesting system. So you just heard about the programs that are existing through Catholic Extension, whereby Latino leaders are being trained and where people are being hired. And so we are blessed to have that initiative in our diocese. So what has happened is we have partnered with the Office of Hispanic Ministry, which is a different office than the Office of Catholic Schools. And together, we have forged what we think is really just a wonderful way of reaching out to the community. So the members, there's a good deal of formation going on throughout the diocese. As you'll see in a few minutes, we have, of the 150 parishes in our diocese, 33 have a significant Latino presence. And so as people from our Office of Ministry fan out around the diocese and have done some major groundwork in establishing communities and in building leadership opportunities and imparting formation, and as they do, and as they welcome and hone these communities, part and parcel to what they talk about is how good our Catholic schools are, and they encourage families to consider them. And then there's just a process whereby, you know, if once families begin to think, gee, maybe this is something that I would like for my children, then there's a whole process which you can see, you know, where interested families begin to explore the school situation. In the past, when they would go to the school, so if a family really were inspired to think, you know what, I might want to consider Catholic schools, they would go to the school, and you can already see this. Many of the people at the school don't speak Spanish, and so there was this, we anticipated that there could really be kind of a breakdown. And so in order to manage that process, we invited volunteers to help in that process of welcoming people and helping to be liaisons with the school community. I want to tell you a little bit about our Segura children. So these are the children who are there on these major scholarships. They have to make at least, the families have to make at least $10,000 a year. And you say, well, they have to have an income, because every family who participates in this program, you know, no matter how humble the circumstances, must pay something. So we have families who pay $25 a month, $50 a month, but they have to pay something. These are families who are Catholic and who are registered in a parish, and I should probably have put that in quotation marks. The Father recognizes you're registered in the parish. They have to complete a fax application, so they're very much like if you were applying to college, so that we need to know what the need is. And if you think about this, so we have many undocumented people who can also participate in this program. So whatever they have, if they have tax information, oh, that's wonderful, but if they don't, you know, we can still work with them with whatever. If they're getting any kind of aid, whether it's food stamps or whatever, we can begin to determine what their need is. Madrinas. So, as I said to you, when we began the program, we began with volunteers, and we began in one school. So again, we're 25, we have 29 schools in the Diocese of Richmond. We began in one school. We needed to begin in a school where we knew that the children would be welcomed and loved, and the families would feel supported. That began to expand. But we started with in an individual school, and as you'll see, and I have some charts to show you, this is a program that has sort of rapidly expanded. But as you might also imagine, you know, and I don't think you have to work too hard. You are newly arrived to this country. You don't speak English well, if at all. If you do speak well, you certainly can't clearly communicate your thoughts. You know, in this relatively new language. You know, you clean hotels for a living, or you work, you know, as a landscaper, and now you're going into this Catholic school where there's a principal, you know, where there's this whole apparatus. And while you want the very best for your children, it's absolutely intimidating to walk into that building for the first time. And especially since you know that you can't even be a full payer in this process. But you want it so badly for your children. So this is what we've experienced, and now we have people who clearly understand because they have been in that situation. So we now have madrinas. We have people who began as volunteers, who were mothers or who were in the community who wanted to help. And then this is a relatively new program in the sense that what we've been doing with volunteers for the last 3 years is now a paid program sponsored through our own pastors, through our annual appeal. And it's a process that went from sort of the seat of pants of, can you help, to, to some regular training, to working with the principals, so that we now have a sort of a systematic way of welcoming people into the schools and then being there to advocate for the children when issues arise. So, I won't read all of these to you, but you can see the bullets. But lots of work in advocating, everything from translating newsletters. How about it if your children are in schools, you've finally gone through the rigmarole of getting them in, and then you don't understand what activities are happening or what your child's homework is, or if there's some event where the child has to, it's a dress down day and he doesn't need his uniform. So now all these people translate all of the materials, they help children with their homework, they walk them through all of the different processes to help with enrollment. I'll just give you a quick rundown, like I said, this may seem very small, but in a small diocese, in a program that's only existed for a little bit of time, you can see how it's grown. And when we first heard that families will not come, they don't really think about Catholic schools as an alternative for so many reasons. What's beginning to happen now through the good work of the madrinas, but also through the fact that the families are happy, the careful, our superintendents in the audience, through the careful work of our own office and those on our team to make sure that we're constantly monitoring so that those families have a satisfying experience while they're in our schools. And you can see we've begun to grow. So 2010, 17, and this year 143 students. And again, we have many more Latino students in our schools. These are children who are nearly on full scholarships. And we began the first with one school for a half a year because I wanted to be so careful about where those children were and were they welcomed and would the school be supportive and would the other families. And so this has taken a good deal of time and effort, both from my department, working closely with the Office of Latino Ministry, with Hispanic Ministry, and also with the volunteers, like I said, our madrinas who are currently there. So we've expanded. So of the 24 schools of the diocese, this current year we are in 16 schools. And then you can see, these names won't mean anything to you, but you can see the student count. And that we have about another 50 students waiting in the wings for next year. So while you're praying, pray that we can get the scholarships that will help to accommodate these children. We have diocesan scholarships. Every family needs to pay something. And as you might imagine, there is a good-sized gap between what the scholarship, what the families can pay, what the diocese can provide, and then, and the total need of the students. But we continuously work on that, but that's not our mission for today. And then just so you can see, so we have advocates in the schools, and if you just take a look at the first column, again, this will not, this won't mean much to you, but most of these advocates are in the schools for 10 hours a week, and so that, like I said, they're paid, they're trained, it's a legitimate position, and they share not only with the families but with our office. So there's a constant there's constant back and forth so that we know what's happening and can really help to ensure that our families are really taken care of. You'll see that that there are some schools listed at the bottom that are showing 0 hours, and of course that's our need for next year. So. And we believe that the positions will continue to be funded. And And I just wanted to give you some sense of how large our diocese is. So like I said, 24 schools, but we're really spread all over. So the Diocese of Richmond is really the entire lower state of Virginia. So you can imagine to go through and to build a program like this has really required many people on the ground. And the people on the ground so often have been the Latino families who maybe came the first year and now act as, as helpers the second year, or who offer us the suggestions about the next things that we need to do to make our program even better. And here are some of, I don't have pictures of all of them, but here are some of our madrinas. They come from, Colombia, Ecuador, from Venezuela, Spain, Mexico, Puerto Rico, so from all different places. And I just thought this was very powerful. This wasn't anything that we asked for, but she wrote a letter about, after the training and after she'd been on a job a while, and it just sort of brings tears. So I'll give you a minute to read that. I just love, as a madrina, it's been such a rewarding experience to help other families who are so strong in their faith and beliefs that would do anything to have an opportunity like the one they are able to receive thanks to the Segura program. Being the bearer of hope for these families moved me completely. And, I was asked really to speak about our Madrina program, but I just wanted to, and again, this probably won't mean much to you, but this is actually a slide from our Office of Hispanic Ministry, because there are, it's very easy to develop silos or to live in silos, and, for my office, which, like I said, had really had to come to learn what the realities were, and then had to really reach out to the community itself to help us to develop strategies that would truly work. That's been one piece of it, but also in our diocesan community, the Office of Hispanic Ministry has a similar program. So while I was able to receive money from our appeal to fund these Madrina positions, there's a similar kind of a sister program that's going on where parish leaders are also being formed and being trained, and they too are being paid a stipend for the work that they're doing, so that there truly is, an uplift and in the quantity of the leadership that's occurring. You'll also know we have many more men in formation for the diaconate program, and through Catholic Extension and through others, the Lay Leadership Initiative is also mirrored. So anyway, I think there is, I'm sure we're not the only ones out there, but there really is a good deal of hope that emerging leadership among the community itself is making a difference to lift up the Latino community, but all of us in the church.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, fellow panelists. Such impressive people, such impressive projects. Thank you to all of you for being here today. I thought what I would do is give you 10 observations that I have from my work in the Jesuit kind of social apostolate, social network, about integration, about successful models of empowerment and leadership, some of the challenges. And so 10 observations. The first is that there is no one model of integration. And I'm going to be using models international and domestic because I think there's so much we can learn from people in other countries and how they do integration work. And so what I mean by there's no one model, when I visited Gujarat and Father Stani Jebamalaya in Gujarat, who has the Shakti Human Rights Center, which he founded 25 years ago, when he showed up as an attorney and built this Human Rights Center and the people came, And they said the hydroelectric dams are taking our land, land grabbing. They promised us water. The water is not there. They promised us irrigation rights, not being followed. He said, that's terrible. I won't do anything for you. That's what the people told me when they retell the story. That's what he told them the first time they came. That's terrible. I won't do anything for you, but I'll accompany you. But it set the whole tone with them that they had the capacity, they had the stories, they knew the violations. He might know the process and he would accompany them. But it set the stage for a whole model of integration that survives to this day after Stanley's been reassigned. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, I was in Notre Dame d'Haïti, the Haitian parish in Miami recently. And after the Mass, we had a meeting in a room that at the top it said, Projet Abolition de Tiqua, the project for the abolition of the small cross. And I thought, what is this? They're trying to get rid of some heresy maybe, something about the small cross. What is this? Well, it was explained to me that the small cross, the Tiqua, is what the illiterate Haitian elderly in the community have to put every time they go sign for any type of public benefit. So when they first came, instead of saying, I won't do anything for you, they said, of course we'll do something for you. We're going to build those capacities. And now, of course, the people who were originally trained have taken over that project and continue it on. It's to say there are different ministries here and different methods of integration. If we try and focus on one, I think we're getting distracted and losing energy. The second is that integration is not just about, how do I put this, lay immigrants, it's about religious immigrants. And so as the Society of Jesus, we have had to learn how to do twinning arrangements with international partners. What 30, 40 years ago I would term as money and men. You know, we would send money and a few men to the missions, and maybe a man would come from the United States to study at our university. That's what integration looked like. Now we have a situation in which the Wisconsin province has a twinning agreement with the Kohima province in India. The Wisconsin province vocation director is from Kohima, and the person writing the dictionary and putting the indigenous languages in Kohima into a dictionary is from the Wisconsin province. So it's a sense of mutuality and integration that not only is the lay community, if you will, but also the religious communities have a lot to learn about how to integrate people into our ministries. Integration, I guess we could spend a day on this, and Don alluded to it earlier, but you know, successful models to me, integration doesn't mean integration. What do I mean by that? They view integration as renovation. The idea that the immigrant is here, so we're just going to kind of move chairs aside and add an extra table, or one more cup of water to the soup, is not really what we mean by integration in the best sense. The successful model looks at it as renovation or creativity, where this person has something to add to the existing model of ministry that we have. And so it's a creative fidelity rather than just subsuming someone into the whole. Again, I know that most of you get that, but just a way of saying that I think we don't want to lose the fact that integration renovates us and recreates us. The fourth observation is that integration begins with the desires, hopes, and dreams of the migrant, or the person seeking to be integrated. When I think of the successful integration projects that Greg Boyle has with gang ministry in Los Angeles, or Father Mike Kennedy with the Juvenile Justice Center and Restorative Justice in the prisons of Los Angeles with juveniles who have life sentences, or when I think of the work of Jeff Putoff in Camden, everything begins with what are your hopes and dreams of the person in front of you. That's so key to our Ignatian spirituality, but it's also key to how we empower others and integrate them. If we lose sight of their hopes and dreams, which I'll come back to in later observation, then we lose our way as organizations and our model ultimately fails, I think. Of course, part and parcel of that is the director of the work that the person is going to integrate into can't be self-centered. And I know we don't know any self-centered Jesuits, I know that. But imagine if you will, that were the case. No, that the successful projects really are those that are other-centered, right? It's not all about you coming to hear what I do in my project, but what are your hopes and dreams, and how does my project help you move toward those hopes and dreams? The most successful organizations in integration, empowerment, and leadership are those that are open to dialogue and recognize the need to change. Pacho Deru, the Colombian provincial, was in Washington, D.C. 2 weeks ago to give some talks at the State Department and at Georgetown. He's been honored by the Colombian government for his peacemaking and peace-building teams, been honored by the government of France, and he gives these wonderful talks, but he talks about being in the mountains and negotiating with FARC and telling them, look, you have these 6 people here, tied up, bound, innocent people. You say, you want what's best for Colombia, I want what's best for Colombia. But this is not freedom, this is not the freedom you want. And he thinks he has them, you know. And they come back to him a little while later and they say, well, you Jesuits, you talk about freedom a lot. But you have the Javeriana here in Colombia. You educate the very leaders who take away our freedoms. You know? He said in the dialogues over the years, he realizes we all have to change in this. So if we want to integrate people, we have to realize each of us has to change. So successful integration models begin with leadership that recognizes not everything's up for grab, but there are challenges that the person in front of us makes for our organization that are going to require change, and sometimes painful change. It takes patience. It takes a lot of patience. Stani, there in Gujarat, the example I began with, would talk about 2- and 3-year processes of accompanying the people as they went to various elected officials' office. And then after 2 years, they don't show up because it's harvest season or one of the kids is sick. And he could step in. He could step in and go to that meeting or make a few calls. But he doesn't, right? It takes patience. If they want to own it, it takes patience, and sometimes persistence was mentioned earlier. And of course, I see that in the United States a lot in our retreat ministries. We have tried to integrate more of the immigrant population into our retreat work, but we're realizing all the models that we're trying aren't working. The retreat house model doesn't really work for the day laborer, right? And then when we try and do it in the parish, it's not quite working. So persistence and patience in integration is very important. The 7th point, 7th observation is that integration and empowerment takes money and strategic planning. Too often we have a situation in which father or sister has been running the center for $25,000 a year salary and returning that into the center, right? Because they live in a community that meets their needs, has their insurance. And when we move towards a lay empowerment model, we have to factor that into the resources that we need for the center. And sometimes that's not done. And when we end up having to pay, we end up perhaps having to close the center or reduce the services a lot because we haven't factored in the costs of integration and empowerment. And it's a very important one because what it does is it forces us out into the grant stream. And I know some of you work in organizations that are heavily dependent on those grants. But what happens then is you begin to chase the grant, right? You begin to look for where the money is, and maybe the money is in citizenship programming, but your real need is getting people adjustments or different types. And so then, as we were talking about at the beginning, it begins with the hopes and dreams of the migrant, the people who are coming to your door saying, we need papers, or we need programs on health or domestic violence, and you say, well, we have citizenship money available, right? So it creates interesting questions when we move towards an empowerment model. So we have to think about this as Jesuits, as religious orders, as a church. How do we adequately resource these social centers? You know, we're not tuition-driven entities, such as the university. Of course, our Catholic grammar schools also need tuition help, but we can't be tuition-driven in many of our models of ministry, so it creates challenges. Successful integration models begin with an honest assessment of one's abilities and gifts and an organization's abilities and gifts. One of the painful things is everyone's favorite person in the parish may no longer be necessary given the needs, right? Integration means change, and if we don't have the Spanish-speaking capacities that we need to serve, we have to make some changes. So we have to have an honest and sometimes painful reflection on not who's good and who's bad, but who has the skills that we need to help with successful integration. Here's one I hope will make sense. This is my 9th observation. It's a balance between going pro and remaining unprofessional. Now, all of us want more professional standards, right? We want professional accounting and auditing when we have large grants. But when I worked as an attorney for unaccompanied minors in Houston in 2004, so many of the staff members were wonderful madrinas, who were working there in the shelter, who came from Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, who knew the kids' backgrounds, who cooked their great foods, who could converse with them, who knew their experience more or less. Well, of course, we wanted better services, so we started going after different grants that would give them more access to better legal services, better financial services for the centers, psychological services. But with that came requirements that meant most of those madrinas got let go because they didn't have the right educational background. And so there's a trade-off we make with our ministries when we go pro on an integration model. That doesn't mean you don't do it, but it means that in some ways we have to look at what we value and what our needs are and what the primary value of our ministry is. A lot more that we could say about that. Of course, the Cristo Rey model of school that the Jesuits have, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the children work 1 day a week in a corporation, and the money from that pays the tuition of the school. So the company gets a 40-hour-a-week employee, and the child works 1 day a week and learns office skills and how to work in a professional environment. It's been a successful model. It's not just a Jesuit model. Many other religious orders maintain, or other religious orders maintain Cristo Rey schools. But one of the trade-offs is you cannot have the undocumented student in your student body because the company can't have the undocumented on the payroll, otherwise they incur fines. There's a trade-off on some of these that we just need to recognize and talk through, and I'm glad we have this advisory group, or Don has an advisory group that will look at this, but it just means an observation of these ministries. Integration models can be successful, but there are trade-offs for some of the people and some of the populations we serve. The 10th observation is that integration is different levels. So one of the mantras that we're using now as Jesuits to our schools, particularly our high schools, but the city is your horizon. Not just the school, but we can have a school located in a neighborhood that has tremendous social ills, right? So if the parish is integrating and has a successful model, how do we integrate that perhaps into the high school? Can the high school use its campus at night for ESL classes, tax help? Can the university integrate some of its classes or workshops or students or legal services into the high school? Can the parish join in that? So it's a way of saying when we integrate one model, we need to begin to look across ministries and see how we integrate. And that, of course, is much larger than Jesuit ministries. That would be Catholic Charities, your parishes, the wonderful network that exists within the Catholic Church. So that's kind of a whirlwind tour through 10 observations. I hope it made some sense. But I think that people on the ground can probably speak to these issues more, but I hope those provide some insight into some of the things that I see. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a little time for maybe a couple of questions or comments, if anyone may have, for this tremendous panel. A question I would have, it's a difficult question, but I'd be interested in when you run into resistance to integration and the resistance that comes from biases, predetermined attitudes, racism. That's the way. How do you overcome or address or deal with those? I think especially in terms of comprehensive immigration reform, it was mentioned earlier about how the difficulty of dealing with persons' attitudes oftentimes are the things that are the biggest obstacle in trying to give folks. I think you understand what. So answer that.
I'm just going to make a quick comment on that. It's something that we've tried to do, and it's a deficiency in the social ministries. We felt we didn't do dialogue well. We didn't know how to engage people in a proper discussion. We knew how to go to a parish, show up, and tell them what the bishop's principles were and what our stance was and what legislatively was happening. But we didn't we didn't really know how to encounter and have a conversation and a dialogue. Now we have someone in the back, Sue Weischer, who's sitting in the back, who has a successful parish model dialogue that they've been introducing in New Orleans. Maybe she can say more about that to you all at a break. I think, if I'm not mistaken, part of Father Riscavige's project involves some form of dialogue. Is that correct? And we've been trying through a grant process we have at the conference to fund groups and programs with small grants to share those best practices and materials about how to dialogue. So, how do you do it I think is an open question, but part of it is I think we do have to learn how to talk to each other, especially in the church. If anyone who's given talks at parishes about immigration reform you need to get hazard pay, you want to get a screen put up. But anyway, I myself have a lot of learning to do in that area, because you do have to learn how to surface those questions and help people talk through them.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Thanks, Father.
So a couple of quick thoughts. Kevin talked earlier about within the House Republican caucus, there's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, I believe. Do you remember? So there are some folks who are never going to be converted. So I think from a strategy point of view, maybe this is too much organizer speak, so forgive me, but I'm concerned about the people in the middle who haven't made up their minds and don't have good information and have been fed bad information and are movable. And so I think that really is an interesting target population to try to engage, to address their questions, and to help them come to some conversion. This is a question that goes back to this morning, or a point I wanted to make. We were talking about, and it does relate, we were talking about congregations in transition. And like you bring the new immigrant community comes in, you've got an established body there, and there's this sense of, who do they think they are coming in? This is our church, And so I think the challenge is that there's this dynamic of winners and losers, right? So the established community, they feel like if we bring others in and share leadership, then we lose something. We lose control, or we lose identity. And so I think in that dynamic, which I see as similar, there needs to be, to the point that was made, intentional dialogue. There has to be, some forum created where people can talk to each other from just a human place about their own experiences, what role the church has played for them in their lives, what their hopes are moving forward for their families, for their faith community. And I think out of that kind of dialogue, there's a way to find some common ground.
Dr. Wood, one other question? Or comment? Question, comment?
Question about how we make sure we're getting more than the sum of the parts. There's such great work being done on particular levels by different groups. I'm wondering, are we doing everything we can to coordinate across things like the great service work being done in particular locales, the great grassroots advocacy work, the kind of high-level institutional advocacy that Kevin Appleby spoke about, and the funding out of the Catholic work? Are we making sure those things add up to more than the sum of the parts, or how can we do that better?
Yes. Well, let me take a stab at that. I think that, and Alexia kind of alluded to that in the kind of an emerging mentality or mindset of the importance of collaboration and coming together and not working as much in silos, and certainly a gathering like this where we can see what other folks are doing is an opportunity for us to work together on different types of projects and see that we're working together is much more than the sum of the parts, but actually having one great big old effective part, I think, and certainly something we can do better. Yes, Doctor.
Sort of a comment. I really enjoyed this day, by the way, to those who put it together. It's tremendous to hear all these great stories, what's going on. And sort of a commonality that I'm hearing that's kind of deepening for me the reality of this education, faith-based community organizing, labor, parishes, all the examples we've been hearing so far. One of the things that works is that when people share a common mission, like all of a sudden, the differences, what you were just talking about, can be such a barrier. We're losing, they're gaining. But when all of us, we say, well, we want to get these Catholic schools going again. We want to do something for this group of immigrants, or we want to build a faith-based community. When all of a sudden people are focused on a common goal, those differences actually kind of take care of themselves in a certain way. And I think we all know that, but it's really struck home to me in these great, in many ways, success stories we've been hearing today, how deep a reality that is. That even that maybe that 1/3 that's never going to be converted, because I think your point is absolutely right. Maybe we might get a few of them, and certainly some in the middle, if we show them a common thing to work on together. And then all of a sudden they're working with the people that they didn't know before, and now in a common project, CCHD is great at this, we find that we're not so far apart as what we thought. So that kind of common goal, how does a pastor, how does a school leader, how does a community organizer lead people to have a common goal? That can cause integration in ways that's almost like a byproduct rather than the goal itself.
Sure. Thank you for that. I think we're out of time, and this is could you join me in thanking this tremendous talent yet one more time?